Welcome everyone to Already Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5, Episode 23. It's called I Borg. So, full spoilers for the episode as always. So, we were promised a bit of a banger after last week's episode.
Yes, definitively not a banger.
No.
Last week's one, that is.
Yes. It was going to be Borg related. We had a sense. I was right. It was the character who I was thinking of that eventually is in Picard.
Is it? Okay.
Which is interesting because it didn't end the way I thought it would, because I knew that. It ended in a way that...
A little bit of subversion for you.
Yeah, it certainly makes me think we're going to see him again at some point. This is not the last of Hugh, who we'll talk about here. And
sounds reason. Obviously, I knew you'd mention that, and when we got to the end where this left off, I was like, this could still be that character, or it could just mean there are more like him later.
So, the premise of this episode is that they find a Borg, an injured Borg, they don't even know what they were doing there, but there was a small ship with Borg on it. A few of them are dead, and there's one surviving member. And there's a bit of a debate even to begin with if we should even bring him out of the ship and give him medical attention. And from there, kind of the debate of... Because this is the thing. At the start of the episode, Picard's kind of... He reacts to Beverly's request to give him medical attention with... I would say anger necessarily, but he reacts strongly, he shoots it down, and then he rescinds. And he rescinds in a very specific way that I thought was interesting, which is it's after Worf suggests, we should kill him and leave him for dead, and erase all evidence of us ever being here so they'll never know to come look for us. And I thought that was so far in the inhumane direction that it kind of snapped Picard out of the fact that he wasn't going to help, that he should be offering more. So there's almost kind of this subversion of that when the Borg is on the ship, and ultimately we find out Picard's realization, his plan now, is to use this Borg to send some kind of virus or something akin to a virus back into the collective to wipe out the entire race that is the Borg. And a lot of the episode from that point on is the debate of whether or not that is something that they should do for a number of reasons, most of them moral. And secondly, the Borg that is saved, his becoming more self-aware, more singular, and
individual, I would say. Yeah.
Individual, yes. This is the word I was trying to avoid that word because they used it a bunch. I was trying to be fancy.
I do, but I don't think singular quite grasps it.
Yeah. And he kind of forms a friendship with Geordi mainly. Who at first is all for Picard's plan, but he's the one who's on the front lines actually talking to him a lot and kind of forms some kind of relationship with this character who then becomes Hugh. At first there's no name, then it becomes 3 of 5 because that's just kind of the closest he can get to, because he was the 3rd of 5 Borg on the ship, and then it ultimately becomes a name, which is just him saying you, and then Geordi goes, "That's it, Hugh." We'll just subvert that into Hugh. It's close enough.
That's how every good name is born.
So, yeah, and I think from a Star Trek Next Generation episode pitch to me, right? Obviously, I just gave you the kind of the premise and the plot, if you will. But as a pitch to me is, why does this work? What does this do other than just presenting them with this moral choice, which this often does. This show is, if you said to me, well, you know how many of these episodes with moral quandaries often lead up to a Picard speech? What if Picard's the one who needs the speech? And what if the person who he would normally be giving the speech to, in this case the subject, in this case Hugh the Borg, is the one who, not intentionally, he doesn't know he's giving Picard a Picard speech, but in effect essentially rebounds a Picard speech onto him and has Picard have the realization. To me, that is the appeal of this episode, beyond everything else.
Oh, it is. The scene where Picard finally talks with Hugh,
which he's avoiding.
Yeah, that scene is, I think, easily the standout moment of the episode. It's like in a already very good episode.
Yeah, the rest of it's really good.
Is head and shoulders above still.
That scene is wonderful for. I mean, because he's avoiding meeting Hugh up until this point because he keeps saying it, not he, and he keeps, he doesn't want to humanize him, right? And And Guinan, of course, is very much like that at first. Guinan, when she thinks Picard might be softening up, goes out of her way to be really aggressive and make a point.
It's one of those moments where, at first, there's a moment of like, wow, this is really harsh from Guinan, because she's usually the one that counsels, like, hey, let's kind of, take this easy. And then, you take a second to remember her backstory.
Yeah, I mean,
yes, this makes sense for her.
We ultimately didn't even learn much about her backstory until the Borg became a subject, because that was directly tied to her backstory and this annihilation, if not assimilation, of her species. So all that stuff is super intriguing. You have characters acting more strongly in a less empathetic way than they normally do, but it's interestingly to talk about it, because it's justified in two different ways. I think you have the greater scope of it, which is just a larger concept of, well, the Borg aren't really people. They're like one computer hive mind that have taken over lots of life forms, so they're not really individual people in the way that any other race is. So you have kind of a cold, just like sort of fact-based...
Is it genocide or is it murder? Is it just killing one being?
Yeah, but then you combine that with the fact that, well, their entire existence is to then assimilate other beings, so therefore they're more like a cancer to the universe than they are a race, and you could argue that and how they go about like expanding. But then, of course, you have the personal side of it as well, which I think for Picard and Guinan obviously as well, but Picard here is that he was assimilated. He remembers that. He clearly is still affected by that. He's not really completely over it, and when he's confronted with Hugh, when he sort of sees him briefly early on when he's behind the cell, but doesn't really speak to him or anything like that. His body language, his attitude, his tone. When every time someone who he normally listens to tells him, "Hey, I'm not so sure about this plan," because Beverly's immediately against it, which makes sense. She's a doctor and she sees someone who needs help. Geordi, who's with him at first, changes his mind and comes back later and says, "Captain, I'm starting to have second thoughts about this," and says, yeah, he's got a name now, and like he's lonely. He feels things. He's feeling separated. Like all of this builds up to this scene where Picard finally agrees to see him, because Guinan says to him, "Look, if you go through with this plan without speaking to him first, without looking him in the eye, you'll never be able to live with it. Like, ultimately, you're going to have this question, so you have to answer that for yourself." So,
and it is the fact that it comes from Guinan, the bit that tips him over the edge, given just how intense she was about this, just a couple of days earlier.
Even if she wasn't that intense, just he knows what happened to her people. So the fact that she's the one giving this advice gives it this weight that, as much as he trusts Geordi, as much as he trusts Beverly, as much as he trusts these other characters, this has a bigger oomph to it. So he does meet with Hugh, and Hugh recognizes him as a Borg. He recognizes him as Locutus, and Picard goes with that, and he's like, "Okay, I'll use this, right? I'll use this to prove that he's still a threat to us. I'll use this to prove that he's just a Borg.
I'm undercover, making it easier."
Yes,
essentially.
Yeah, and because they've cut off his signal to the collective, he can't know or not know if that's true. Hugh, so which is the first thing they do, by the way, because they know that they could otherwise they could just track him and come and get him easily on the ship. Like, yeah, so they've learned
to the point where at first it's like, no, he's not leaving that cell with that damn. Don't care if he needs sickbay. You bring your stuff in there to him. Yeah.
He's treated like he's the biggest danger on the ship. Immediately.
To be fair, he probably is.
Yeah, I mean, he is to a point. Yeah. But you have that weird thing with the Borg where they also ignore people if it's not their mission. Like we see at the end with Geordi again, we're reminded, because that was one of the coolest things about them in their first episode, was they went over to their ship and the Borg just didn't care.
Yeah.
You're not a threat to us.
But in this scenario, if they have, Hugh or, not just a Borg on board at that point, they are a threat, because it's like, well, they're in the way, right?
Yeah, and they're also just going to, I mean, even if he's not a threat himself, he's going to attract the rest of the Borg, which is,
That's what I mean by,
yeah. And
then the rest of the crew is a threat to the rest of the Borg.
So, yeah, this is wonderful stuff, because Picard tries to, says, I'm working to assimilate everyone on this ship. Like, we're going to do it, right? We're going to take everyone. And Hugh says, but they'll resist. And Picard's like, well, resistance is futile. And he's like, but some do resist. It's almost the most a Borg could show they're not a Borg anymore is to not agree with the sentence "resistance is futile." No, but I think resistance is quite futile. That you mention it, like
yeah, he actually says no, resistance is not futile, and that's kind of the tipping point.
yeah, and says, "Wait, so would this mean Geordi would be assimilated?" He's like, "Yes, everyone will be assimilated." He's like, "Well, Geordi won't want to. He would rather die." And then ultimately, he finally says, "I." You know, even though he's become more human as the episodes went on, he's still been saying, "We are Hugh." But this is the moment where he says, "I." He says, "I don't want that." And it's that moment, right, where he has free will. He has desires. He fears death. Because that's the first thing is that he's lonely because he's not with the collective, and then he learns from Geordi and Beverly some ideas of like having a name of. Probably honestly, the second best scene in the episode for me is probably the scene where Geordi inadvertently realizes that Hugh considers him a friend, because he basically has to define what a friend is, because Hugh's saying, you're singular, you're completely individual, so are you not alone? You don't have the voices of everyone else with you. And Geordi's like, well, no, sometimes I'm lonely, sure, but that's why friends exist, that's why loved ones exist. And he's like, well, what's a friend? And he has to explain, well, that's someone who's there for you, it's someone who makes you feel better. It's that sentence where, and then Hugh goes, oh, like Geordi. And it's that moment where Geordi realizes that he makes you feel better. And at that point, you can't deny that he is a living being of some kind with some amount of desire, feelings, fear, pain, whatever it is.
Yeah, as much as the I is the tipping point for Picard in that scene, this is the tipping point for Geordi, right?
Yeah.
As to, okay, he can't go through this anymore.
Yeah. At this point, he's too much of a life form. And it's because it's funny, because there's definitely moments in this episode where Picard is being harsh. When he's talking to Geordi about lab rats, he's like, when centuries ago, when they used to experiment on animals, that they'd get attached, and I suggest you remove your attachment. And I'm like, yeah, Picard, I feel like in any other episode you'd be saying it's great that we have moved on from that and that we shouldn't have lab rats, and there's a reason why we felt bad about it.
He would, and that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
Is these lingering after effects of what's happened to him are really clouding his judgment and making him completely out of character to what Picard usually is.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about the idea is that he's the one who needs the speech this episode. He's not given it. He basically forces Hugh to give. I mean, it's not a speech. I mean, I'm saying that in the sense that it kind of comes out in this different form, but that's effectively what it is. Is he needs the Picard speech this episode?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's delightful.
It is, and it's a pretty fantastic episode.
Yeah. Yeah. All the little details throughout that conversation, of course, are very good. He keeps prodding. He keeps going down every avenue that Hugh kind of responds with. He goes further and deeper down that path until ultimately they get to the "I want this" or "I don't want that." And the conversation that comes after that is like, okay, well, I can't go through do this anymore. This makes us no better than the Borg if we just send off this virus to wipe them all out. We're no better than them if we just do it that way. So what do we do now? And they immediately start talking about, well, let's leave him where he was and let the Borg come and get him. And, well, do we wipe his memory? And then Picard says, well, what if we don't? Like, maybe what he now feels, what if his realization is something they all share because he has it? And maybe in a way it would kind of end the Borg as they are, because they'd all have this, and some of them would
convert them essentially.
Yeah, some of them might react differently. Like maybe some of them would become like violent. Maybe it would split them into two, because half of them would seek comfort in the collective, and
half the Borg is still better than all the Borg.
Yeah, but it would be their choice. They'd be making it out of some form of free will, which would be very different. I suppose arguably at that point is I guess the prime directive, because you're messing with how they're making decisions, but
yes, but also they are a very advanced species already.
Oh yeah, they're actually more advanced arguably than everyone else. So yeah.
And also this still plays into the idea of, well, no, I mean, even if there's been no official declaration of war, we're still treating it as an enemy combatant, and even if this is significantly more humane than what they were going to do with the virus, they're still looking at it as this could work in our favor as as a weapon, right? And I'm assuming the scenarios during war that suspends the prime directive, right?
Possibly,
I'm assuming so. I could be wrong on that, but maybe.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, and I was thinking this like from the start of the scene, I'm like, yeah, but what if he doesn't want to go back? Like if we're agreeing that he has some form of free will now, if he is a person now, then surely he should have a say in this. And Beverly brings this up, and quite rightly, all of them just shut up. They all just realize she's right. Like, we have to consider that. We have to ask him. He has to have a choice in this. And it's actually kind of heartwarming that ultimately Hugh says he doesn't want to go back. He wants to remain with Geordi in the ship and not go back to the Borg. But he makes the choice to go back anyway because he thinks it'll be too dangerous for all of them if he stays with them. So he actually not only gets free will by the end of the episode, but he performs a selfless act.
Yeah, it's interesting that thematically this follows on from a few episodes ago with the empath woman, right?
Mm.
With the ending of that, where in the same way that she kind of had to go and like, hey, do you know what, I've taken on a lot of Picard's personality, kind of, and this is kind of like, I'm doing my duty. This is kind of a similar thing where he's taken on a lot from Geordi, and is a like, hey, no, I'm doing what I think is right because of what he's learned from our characters.
And I love the ending actually, because Geordi says, "I want to go down with them and wait." And sure enough, a couple of Borg come by and like they collect the dead, beam them up, and it's that thing where because they hook into him, right? Because one of the things they set up early in the episode is he's got like a little port in his hand. And that's kind of where they feed with energy. They don't feed with food in a nutritional sense. And at the end of the episode, like before they beam him up, they connect to his port, and you're thinking, in that second, that might be it. He might just have had his mind wiped because they've realised that he's went through something weird and they're going to erase it so it doesn't infect anything. But there's just that little moment right at the very end where they're beaming up, and just before as the beam's sort of like coming over them, he just looks at Geordi to say, I'm still your friend. Like, I'm still me. I'm still here. Yeah. Because that was the other lines he had before he went down. Is that he said, "I don't want to Picard specifically before they beam down." He says, "I don't want to forget that I'm Hugh." So as always, everything that goes on with this guest character is largely about exploring how our main characters react to it, and primarily Picard and Geordi, a little bit of Beverly. Others are just kind of tangentially kind of there, here or there, but everything that comes from this and is an exploration of how Picard's still dealing with his time in the Borg is fascinating, and it's kind of a we have a lot in science fiction. We have the robot or the AI or the alien sometimes like befriends a human and wins them over in time. This is a very interesting version of it where these characters normally are very open to new robots and life forms and species. It's just in this particular case with this particular species, Picard has a vendetta. And admittedly, yes, the Borg at large are kind of scary and there's a lot of reasons to not trust them. But
they're bringing in some prejudice to it that they usually don't.
And I think the idea that our main characters have a prejudice that can be broken down and is broken down pretty much entirely just by the person, like the subject, the life form in question, just by being good and just sort of proving them wrong and all the measurements they normally have anyway. This is normally the sort of stuff they would bring up when they're talking about other life forms, when they're convincing, I don't know, like say they go to two warring worlds and they try to show how each side, how the other world's actually just as worthy of life and innocent as they are, and why you're both should be thriving and not fighting. Like, this is exactly the same sort of arguments they would be using at those times, right? It's the exact same sort of thing. And that's what gives it weight. And it's the idea that even our main characters can go through experiences that give them a prejudice, but ultimately, like, Picard does see the right things. He does ultimately come to the right decisions and the right frame of mind.
It does. It follows on from some like interesting ideas we've had in the past with this show, in that it doesn't always make the easy choices for characters. In this case, by the end, they do make the right choice, but more the point that sometimes they are wrong, especially at first, which not always, it's rare occasions, but I'm thinking of some of the stuff with Worf, for example. We definitely had some of that, those episodes where he wasn't making what we would say is the right choices. It was more interesting, I would say, because of that. And it's the same here where I think we kind of watch this episode and we see Picard making the wrong choices for the most part. And, that's kind of what makes it interesting, because a lot of the times our characters just they make the right choices, all's fine at the end, and everyone else is the ones that wrong. We're it's we're just teaching everyone else how to be better. Whereas this time it's it's flipped a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that the characters can be wrong, and they're wrong because of good writing, because it's true to who they are, and it makes sense that they're wrong about something. And it shows that even our characters, because it'd be very easy in a Star Trek show where the whole idea is we've achieved some form of utopia and everyone's like better and happy, and we've eliminated a lot of the prejudice and a lot of the problems that we suffer from in the modern world, and well, let's say the modern world, the entire human history would be a better way of putting it. Is that it could very easily turn into, we're perfect, and we just go around telling everyone else why we're perfect. And there's a lot more weight in the characters and in the premise of the show. And it's funny to say that we were 5 seasons into this show at this point, but it adds more weight to the premise of the show that the characters are still always learning, and it's made that point numerous times now throughout the show that they do still make mistakes and they do still learn, and it's an ongoing struggle and an ongoing it's an ongoing thing. It's not something you wash your hands of it and you're done and you've achieved perfection and that's it. You can chill out for the rest of time. And when Picard does try to chill out for the rest of time in this episode, he's got his fancy robe on, he's going to have a nice little cognac or whatever he's having, he's going to read his book, and Guinan shows up interrupting. It's like when he tries to pretend that everything's okay, someone else.
You need to confront reality.
Yeah. So the idea is, that's a good way of putting it. Like, pretending that you can just like put your feet up and never like worry about a choice is as bold as like annihilating an entire civilization is not reality. So no, that's good stuff. And I also think this raises some interesting questions of, okay, Hugh's back with the Borg, he's in the collective, so what does happen as a result of that? Do they notice that he is different from the rest of them? And if they do, assuming they don't just erase his memory instantly as soon as he acts differently, is this going to be a valuable asset at some point down the line when there's another Borg encounter?
I think as well there's an interesting idea that the Borg, they assimilate to learn about cultures and species, right? That's kind of part of the thing. It's this knowledge and understanding, and that's just how they do it. If they just, all right, well, we absorb all this, and this is how it works now. Do they, the Borg collective, look at Hugh and find that interesting? Maybe they don't want to just erase that immediately because they want to learn from that. Almost re-assimilate him back in the new version of Hugh so that they can learn that way.
Yeah, or there's always the idea that we will have other Borg that he's like, spread the ideas to, that also now want some sort of individuality, and like, I'm not necessarily suggesting, I joked earlier there would be a Borg civil war. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but I do wonder, like, if later on we go to encounter some Borg again and it turns out, oh no, this is like this is Borg who have like are on Hugh's side now, and like what do we do with that? Yeah,
less a civil war, but more maybe a breakaway faction.
Yeah. So that could be interesting to explore. At the very least, though, given that Hugh does show up eventually in Picard, I do think we're going to see him again, or at least hear about what happens to him down the line in some form.
That makes sense.
Admittedly, it may not be in this show. We got several other shows that they could do that in.
Could be in one of the movies as well.
Yeah, could be in Deep Space Nine, could be Voyager, could be whatever. I don't know. In fact, there's a character in Voyager who is ex-Borg, so that would maybe be a place to explore this idea. Or maybe that's a character that kind of comes from it as an evolution of what they do with Hugh before then.
It would make sense.
I don't know, but we'll find out. We got stuff to discover and explore, so that's cool. Yeah, it's a really good episode. I basically don't really have anything to fault, honestly.
No, it's pretty flawless. Even this, there is that scene that stands above everything else. It's not because any other part of the episode is doing anything wrong. It's still firing on all cylinders. That scene is just that good. No,
there's a lot of just general exhilarating stuff. Like when they first see the Borg, the reactions to it, especially Picard's reaction when they tell him, and the camera tracks right into his face, and he looks like he's just shat his pants. And it's good stuff.
There's a moment after he's like, "All right, bring on board," where he kind of just walks off to his ready room. I think it's Data who looks around at Troy. And he's like, "You got to go check on him."
Yeah,
and she just walks in. He's like, I know you're dealing with some stuff, Captain. He's like, oh, just piss off. I don't want to hear from you.
And the idea of Data as well, given that he's Data, is even like he just is aware that Picard's acting out of character, so he immediately turns to the counselor. Is like, "This is your job. Someone's acting out of character. This is what you do."
Yeah. Go deal with it. And then she does shit all.
Mm.
She's just like, maybe you aren't fully recovered from your experience. That's quite normal. And he's like, I got it under control. Go away. And then she does, and that's it. And she does nothing else all episode.
Yeah, I mean, she is right. Like he's lying through his teeth here, but
yeah, but you'd think an empath would know that and maybe do a job of it better.
I think she. I mean, I would assume she does know that. I suppose at this point she's supposed to like push the subject or go to Riker and say the captain's maybe acting a little unfit for duty or something. I don't know.
This is the thing. It's fine. Like I'm willing to assume that she knew that. I don't need that spelled out. It's the fact that then she does nothing for the rest of the episode. She never. I don't even remember her doing anything in the rest of the episode.
Allegedly, yeah, she's not in most of the group scenes where they're debating what to do later. It would have made sense, maybe, I don't know, for her to go back to him. If nothing else, maybe a scene with Picard talking to her before he talks to Hugh, like after he's had the conversation with Guinan, or something. There's something to sort of like.
Maybe even after the scene with Hugh, where you can go, look, you might have been right. Maybe I'm not fully over this, and not that I need him to kind of just verbalize all that, but I think he needed some follow up with her specifically.
Even just a quick scene at the very end of the episode, perhaps, maybe not the final shot, but like, you know, somewhere around the ending where he goes to Troy's office and just walks in for an appointment, just something to show, you know, just to sort of loop it back around to this idea that he does need to talk about this.
Yeah,
we don't need to hear it, we don't need to see it, we just need to, you know.
I guess if we're nailing down a flaw that this episode has, it's that it doesn't follow up on this moment.
I mean, it's not. I don't even call it a flaw.
It's a pretty small flaw, you know.
I feel like what this really is you just want to shit on Troy for a little bit because it's one of your favorite pastimes.
Would I do that?
Because the scene still has purpose. The scene still shows us how Picard is, and we see that he's not acting as of sound of mind as he normally does. He's acting a bit more irrationally. He's acting out in anger. So the scene has as much purpose as it needs to exist. It's just doing everything it's doing right.
It does. I do think though, if it did have some sort of follow up, the episode would be even better.
I mean, it's pretty great. So
it is, yeah.
And I'm sure when we're doing a top 5 of the season, it's probably going to be in.
It's definitely going to be at least talked about, right?
Yes, it's going to be in contention if nothing else. But yeah, so I mean, obviously the Borg is one of the best concepts that Star Trek: The Next Generation has introduced from just a raw like menace and threat, like, you know.
Yeah, it might be this show's greatest addition to the mythology of Trek.
Yes,
right?
I mean, I think Star Trek: The Next Generation compared to the original series is better in a lot of ways, and a lot of it is to do with the writing and the actual sort of, you know, dealing with moral dilemmas and ethical decisions and just debating ideas. Like, I think it's much better in those reasons. Arguably, it's not added as much to the mythology as the original series did, because the original series, I mean, obviously they were a bit different looking, but introduced Klingons, introduced Vulcans, introduced Romulans, introduced like so many things that are core to Star Trek. Next Gen, it did introduce the Ferengi, I suppose, but they're not as like. It's introduced the Bajorans and some of those other races.
It's definitely introduced stuff, a lot of things, yeah. But the majority of it is still built on that core that original series kind of gave it.
I think the Borg, though, feel like they're up there with the Romulans and the Vulcans and the Klingons, whereas the rest of them do feel like, they're solid enough and they're nice additions, but they're very much in the next level down.
They flesh out the world, sure, but they're not a temple pillar of the lore.
Yes. And admittedly, you know, there's an argument, I think, as they go into the movies and the later shows that they do rely on the Borg a bit much. I've heard that from long-term Trek fans. Like, they maybe go back to the well a bit too much. But, you know, that's not really Next Gen's problem or fault. So
yeah, I'd say, like, the two biggest things in Next Gen, again, as of this point, are the Borg and Q, probably, right? Mm. And I think I can definitely see how both of those can be overdone.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking forward to Q and Picard season 2. He's coming soon.
You have fun with that, yeah?
We'll see. But yes.
Optimism.
But no. But this is an excellent episode. It's a good stand-up one. And I'm looking forward to more Borg stuff. But what's coming next time, I think we might ask. The next episode is called The Next Phase, and here's the description on IMDb. A transporter malfunction combined with a Romulan ship under stress and a damaged cloaking device creates the illusion that Ensign Ro and Geordi are dead, but Geordi doesn't believe it to be so, and he acts accordingly.
Sorry, you say it creates the illusion that Ensign Ro and Geordi are dead, but Geordi doesn't believe it to be so.
Do I take that to mean that they are walking around like not ghosts, but like everyone else thinks they're dead, but they're walking around?
That's what I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the you didn't read the wrong name or anything. That is what I'm picturing.
It says Geordi twice, like it's definitely his name
fine.
again.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless this description's wrong and they've messed up and it's meant to be Ensign Ro and someone else.
No, I'm willing to assume it is like kind of like that old ghost story style, but it's more okay. They're essentially stuck out of phase with everyone else. Everyone thinks they're dead, but they can see everyone. They just can't interact.
Yeah. And then he somehow proves that they're still there by manipulating stuff and tinkering with things.
I'm assuming it's going to be that sort of episode. Which don't get me wrong, it's a tried and true concept, right? And they can be great.
Oh yeah, and the rating's pretty solid, so I mean I have no reason to suspect bad things. So this is cool. So that's the next phase that's coming next time. But let us know what you thought of I Borg in the comments below. And obviously the title was perfect for what the story ended up being. No disputes there. So yeah, let us know what you think of the episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out a lot on YouTube, so please hit the buttons. And of course you can support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble and help keep all the content coming. But that is us, so thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek, and somewhere out there one day Wesley Crusher will achieve sentience.